Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies, the Brussels-based think tank of the European People's Party. National elections in Hungary 5 days ago have grown great attention, not only in Hungary itself, but also very much on the European level. That's not by surprise. You all know that the relationship between Hungary and the EU has been quite tensed over the last few years, to say the least. From disputes over migration, Prime Minister Orban's close relation to Moscow and Beijing, or the unsolved controversy on standards of rule of law. Well, entering now a fourth term of the Fidesz government under Viktor Orban, we have to look a bit into the future of Hungary, its domestic, political and constitutional developments, the impact of the elections on the Central and Eastern European region, and of course, to the relation between Hungary and the European Union. My name is Peter Hefler. I'm the Policy Director of Martens Center, and I have the great pleasure to moderate this discussion. And it's, of course, a great honor and pleasure for me to welcome three renowned experts on Hungarian politics. I would like to start with you, Pavlina. Pavlina Janova is currently the Research Director of AMO. It's one of the leading Czech think tanks on international affairs. Pavlina, you have extensively worked on the regional politics and, of course, of the Hungarian role, for example, in the Visegrad 4 framework. As a second speaker from Hungary, from Budapest, I would like to welcome Dr. Peter Greco. He is the Executive Director of the Political Capital. It's a think tank and analysis institute, and you, against a wide academic background also in the US, in UK and Italy, have worked extensively on disinformation, Russian policy, and of course on domestic policy issues in Hungary. And as a third, not least panel, it's Milan Nitsch, currently affiliated with the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Auswärtige Politik, the DGAP in Berlin. Your background is also on Central European studies, but also Central Asia. You worked with our partner Globsec in Bratislava on different issues, and also as a broadcaster on Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. So I'm very delighted to have you all with us. And of course, you as our audience are cordially invited to join later on our discussions. As we are streaming this event online on our webpage and on YouTube, please use the respective chat functions. My colleagues are collecting your contributions, your comments, your questions, and I will discuss these later on with our panelists. But we start first of all with a short statement of each of you, then followed by a round of discussion we have among us, and later indeed then switching to your comments. Rina, let me start with you, and not starting with domestic issues, but rather the view from outside, from Czech, for example, as a neighbor of Hungary. How did you perceive the outcome? How had the peoples in Czech Republic and Slovakia, for example, have reacted on the outcome?
Hello, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to participate in this discussion together with such great speakers. As for the outlook on the situation in Hungary and on the results of the election, from here, I wouldn't say that the Czech government was particularly pleased with what happened, even though the current government is headed by the Civic Democrats, who are nominally ideologically affiliated with the Fidesz party. I don't think that there were great sympathies between the two leaders, the Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala and the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. I think that the Czech government would have preferred for the opposition to win. Also, in this current situation, given the predominance of the topic of the conflict in Ukraine and the Russian aggression, where obviously there are very different positions of the Czech government and the Polish government on the one side, and the Hungarian government in the framework of the Visegrad 4 on the other side. I think what just to state from the general point of view, what I think is going to happen in the Czech-Hungarian relations and in the Visegrad framework is that I don't think they will be prioritized at this moment. I think they will be rather dormant, and we will see what will happen in the future, given how the conflict evolves. What we shouldn't forget about is that the Czech Republic is about to become the president of the EU Council, is going to take over the presidency in the EU Council, and it will be one of our tasks to try to find consensus among all the countries. And I think that might be a challenge. That it's always a challenge, but given these complicated times, it'll be very interesting for the Czech Republic to try to work with Hungary and include it as much as possible in the EU decision making. That would be it from me at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Milan, you also worked extensively on the regional issues and maybe also bringing in the German position, because you're based in Berlin for the moment. And well, Germany has always played an important role in Europe-Hungarian relations. What is the perspective first from the region again, and then maybe from a Berlin perspective of you?
Peter, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be in one webinar with Peter and Pavlina. I would say, first of all, it's a bigger victory for Fidesz than expected, and bigger loss for the united opposition than expected. And Michal Zang, our homeland party, is a surprise, smaller winner of these elections. And the impact on the Hungarian discourse, which is already quite radicalized, quite nationalistic, with our homeland party in the parliament, will be even more radical and more pro-Russian. That's number one. So I will come back to the point. I think if Viktor Orban and Fidesz are now a clear political hegemon at home, to use Edith's good terminology, in my opinion, I think Viktor Orban is more vulnerable on the European international scene that meets the eye. This landslide victory saved the EU perhaps from an unwanted crisis had there been a contested result, on top of very problematic electoral process, which is very well described in the long preliminary conclusions from the OSCE election observation mission. On top, if there would be a very narrow contested result, it would be really a crisis about how to approach it among the EU partners. We don't have that crisis, so that's a silver lining in this. However, the EOM included a strong German presence, and I think especially in Bundestag, this will not be.
Milan, we can't hear you for the moment. He will be back. Well, Peter, I think till Milan has fixed his problems, now let's indeed narrow a bit down into the domestic situation. Hungary, you have extensively written before the elections and a lot of analysis afterwards. What is then, by your perspective of view, the most striking lesson for the opposition to start with the losing partner, so to say?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks a lot for you, Peter, and for Marta Center for having me this event and to discuss these issues with wonderful colleagues. So what is the major lesson to learn for the opposition? I think, first of all, that the primary is not necessarily the magic tool for everything. It seemed to work pretty well, for example, at the municipal elections, but it did not work that well right now on the parliamentary elections. And of course, it's a big question. It's a big question that who is mainly responsible for this crushing defeat on the opposition side, and the blame game have already begun. I do all the parties, obviously, it's a six-party cooperation on the opposition side, and they all blamed Péter Márki-Zay because it's an easy game, and none of them have resigned from their position, which is, I think, quite remarkable. On the other hand, I do think that the parties at least as much to blame. Some of them were not throwing all their weight into the campaign to win the elections. But I think this is one point among the many. The other one is that this is the first and important point. Yeah, of course, the opposition made mistakes, and it lost 900,000 votes compared to back to 2018. And which in a country where we have 8 million voters, this is a huge amount. And yes, I think we can, and there is, let's say, a lot of discussion right now on the opposition side that what are the lessons to be learned. But we have to put it in the context, and Milan have already did it partially, that this election took place in a hybrid regime, in a non-democratic environment, where the advantage of the governmental side that is held by all the state actors possible is unprecedented. Already back to 2018, OSCE have published the most critical report so far in a new member state regarding elections, where there have been some problematic ones in other countries as well. And this report, let's wait for the final one, but I assume that it will be even far more critical, and the early reports suggest so. So there's a highly uneven distribution of resources, with the government practically having unlimited amount of money that they can spend on billboards, on the online space, in the press, everywhere, because there was no cap for the governmental spending, and the government and Fidesz was totally inseparable during the whole campaign. And the other thing is, in general, that there is in the media space, Milan mentioned the concept of hegemony. I think we can obviously observe a hegemony there. And let's just remind the audience that the three main messages from the governmental side were all pieces of disinformation. In the last days, where in the campaign, the government could take a momentum, sending practically two messages. One is that the opposition have conspired with the Ukrainian state and with Volodymyr Zelensky to grab the power, and there is a Ukrainian electoral interference into the election. No proof have been presented for this statement. And the other one was that the opposition wants to send troops to Ukraine and also to cut all the gas ties with Russia, which was also not really up to reality. And the third important message of the government was that in Hungary, your children is in danger of sex-changing surgeries. No one practically had ever heard of sex-changing surgeries in Hungary. This is really off topic. It's a non-existent issue, and also it's not allowed according to legislation. Still, it was in the campaign. So what I would point at this here is state-sponsored disinformation, and unfortunately, in Hungary, where there are more than 500 media outlets put in a central foundation called Kashma, and it's working as a very efficient brainwashing machinery, and sending a lot of pro-Russian conspiracy theories. I think the European Union have to be pretty careful. Political capital together with HCLU have filed a complaint to the European Commission saying that Russia Today, Sputnik, and other Russian propaganda outlets might have been banned within the European Union, but if state actors like the Hungarian government are spreading Russian disinformation, these measures are maybe not enough, and there is a need for a new toolkit.
Peter, the topic of Russia was, before the elections, very widely debated, and many thought, well, given the historical experience of the Hungarians with Russia, that might be rather playing into the field of the opposition. Apparently, Orban managed to spin it around. Did this really felt on fields which have been very fruitful for this reception?
Yes, and this is honestly, nobody really expected that the government will be able to capitalize from the war, given that Viktor Orban is the most pro-Putin prime minister within the European Union. What you have to know is two things. First of all, Orban have quite efficiently socialized and educated its voter base in the last decade in a pro-Russian direction. In a poll already back to 2018, more Fidesz voters wanted to have Moscow as a strategic ally than Washington DC, which is quite telling. And the other thing is that this message of war resonated pretty much to the Hungarians, that in whose let's say value set, security is always the first, and it sent a double message. First, if you need physical security, you don't want to go into the war, let's vote for us, because the opposition are of warmongers. Second, if you want cheap gas, then vote for us, because the opposition would just cut it.
Pavlina and Milan, we will go into the regional effects and the prospects for the future of the cohesion of this region. But Peter, I would like to just follow your comment on the referendum, which was held at the same time, and of course, probably not accidentally, because this touches another issue which we have to do, and I would like to discuss with you. That's more the ideas of society, of an authoritarian state, and conservative Christian state, illiberal democracy, as it has often been announced. To what extent has this prepared, of course, the field for his success?
It's a question to me, right?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For his voters, this is definitely a persuasive message. And I mean, it's not new and not Hungary specific that this symbolic issues just dominating the populist right discourse. We can see it in many other countries within the European Union, and also we could see it in the United States as well. The interesting thing is that Orban could build up this huge, very strong symbolic enemies, such as feminism, gender theory, LGBTQ, transgender, and so on. While the big problem in Hungary is definitely not that these movements have progressed so far, but it's that they are almost non-existent and pretty weak and do not have too much impact on the public discourse. So Hungary is not in a, let's say, post-liberal state, but in a pre-liberal state. And interestingly, these messages, for example, on the war against man and all these topics, and war against Christianity and so on, which is really, I don't think it's an urging issue in Hungary, but it gives Orban a good opportunity to connect not just to Western European far-right parties, but also to the American conservative right, because they resonated their messages. What is pretty different in the two countries, I think, is the context, because I think there might be some probably valid argument in that some of these movements went too far in the United States, but in Hungary, they are almost non-existent. So this is like fighting with imaginary boogeyman, but Orban is an artist of this kind of populist rhetoric.
We will later on discuss these also in the wider European context and what it means for the right political movements. But Milan and Paulina, these discussions on societies, on gender issues are not something well unknown to your countries as well. And nonetheless, there is some disputes, as we have seen over the last weeks and months, between the Visegrad countries, for example. How do you expect the future of this group of people? Well, now it's Russia, of course, very much influencing the discussion, but that aside, this actual Ukraine war, are there still close links if we look into the societies, into the values, for example? Paulina, you might start.
Thank you. It's a very complex question. I think we could discuss this for a very long time. But first, one point to the traditional values promoted by Fidesz, because in this context, what I found very interesting was the attempt at taking feminist positions by the newly elected president, Katalin Novák, who spoke, who said something like, if you are doubting my autonomy in this office, it's like you are offending all women. And I was wondering, was that really an attempt by Fidesz to attract some more liberal voters, some voters who might be inclined to vote based on issues such as feminism? And I would be very much interested what Peter has to say to this. About Visegrad, and yeah, actually, I don't think there ever was something as a united set of values that was shared by the countries. There were sometimes shared interests, but I really wouldn't put all the 4 countries into one box. If you take a look at the Czech discussion, you can see that the issue of traditional values or religion isn't really used by any major political party to mobilize their voters. That being said, of course, we still can't discuss issues such as same-sex marriage, for example. But I would say that in this sense, the Czech Republic or the Czech society is quite liberal, and I think ideology is such a hard emphasis on ideology, traditional ideology, as in Hungary or as in Poland, wouldn't be successful in the Czech Republic. As for the future of Visegrad, as I already said in the beginning, I think that we are currently in the sort of a critical phase when we take a look at the political level of the Visegrad cooperation. But at the same time, looking at the more than 30 years of history of Visegrad, I think there is something very valuable that we should be able to keep and that we should be able to use, especially given the situation in Hungary now, and that is the cooperation among people and among civil societies. Because I think the Visegrad group at this point can also be used to support the people in Hungary who are pro-democracy, who are not necessarily voting for Orban. Perhaps my last point, following up on that, is that what I think is important to mention when we talk about the elections in Hungary is that, of course, it's very much true that the playing field was tilted in favor of Fidesz. But the question is, would the opposition be able to win if the elections were free and fair, actually? And I'm not sure that it would. And yeah, so that's another question that I keep asking myself: what would have to happen for the opposition to actually be stronger? Yep.
Well, I'm there to immediately ask you, Peter, on answering this very complex issue, which indeed was one of my questions as well. What kind of strategy could we foresee internally, as well as maybe supported by the neighboring countries or the European Union, which is a delicate issue, we all know?
Yeah, so I do think that the opposition has to learn the lessons, and yeah, no question that they did mistakes as well. Could they have won in a totally democratic setting? I mean, the nature of these regimes is just you will never know. So that's, you just can't subtract the effect of the regime, because it's everywhere, and also, you know, it's also plays a role in that who is entering into politics, who dares to enter into politics, burning themselves. If you are running on a party of an opposition party, then you don't have too much chance to have, you know, any jobs, for example, in state-related companies, for example, and there are quite many. So in Hungary, that state controls pretty much of everything. So you just never know. But yeah, I mean, the advocates of the system say, and at this point, I think they are right, that back to 2019, the opposition could make a surprise win. okay, it was a municipal elections, not parliamentary elections, so the stakes were not that high, but still it was possible. And then it totally lost, and then they made a quite successful primary campaign, but then they lost their momentum. The thing is that the I think there is no such a thing that the voters cannot how to say, if they are actively seeking, they can get governmental critical and independent information. But I think the price of getting this information is getting higher and higher. What just comes in your face as a default, it's the governmental propaganda, and that already creates, I think, an environment in which I think in Central Eastern European countries with a with a socialist past, it's more difficult to let's say to break this kind of information dominance. And I think what so the opposition has to go through a purgatorium, I think. So it's like it's there should be new opposition forces. They should forget this joint list because it just didn't work well, and they have to do their homework. But as I told, none of the leaders of the opposition parties have resigned so far after such a crushing defeat, which I don't think is the good first step for any renewal. The big question will be is that who will dare to enter into politics. This result will have a dispiriting effect on the opposition, but I can easily imagine that, you know, in 1 year, maybe 2 years, there can be some new promising faces and voices, even within the current political players, and even beyond. I think Peter Márki-Zay will remain around. Probably he will try to build his party. I think he can be capable of, let's say, getting into the European Parliament. I think Momentum probably can gain back its voter base. Democratic Coalition is relatively strong still, but it seems like something is missing from the picture. And the question is that can the opposition parties really will be theoretically could theoretically defeat the current political hegemon in an increasingly difficult institutional environment where we are heading towards a Putin-style controlled democracy. And one last remark on the Visegrad cooperation. Yes, the Orban, I think this victory is a Pyrrhic victory for Orban in two senses. First of all, the economy is in a very bad shape, and he has to deal with cap on gas prices, with growing budget deficit, with the international environment of the danger of stagflation and so on, and frozen EU funds at the moment, and the possibility that MFF can be also frozen due to the rule of law procedure. Plus, he faces an isolation that he has never seen before. So the first politicians who congratulated him, okay, there was Benjamin Netanyahu, but he's out of office. There was Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Erdogan, Donald Trump, again not in office, and from the part of the Western partners, rather big silence and congratulations with a huge delay. And Orban is increasingly isolated in the whole region, and that's, I think, something that undermines his whole, let's say, self-definition as the fighter for Central Eastern Europe. But I think, yeah, Milan and Pavlina can tell much more about that.
Yes, before I go back to you both, one question which always drives me is what are the forces inside Fidesz? Can we assume it's an homogeneous, united force? Is it something which only Orban helps together? And well, let's assume he will once leave. Will this fall apart, then facing a completely new landscape in politics of Hungary? Or do you think they are ideologically united to a large extent and be able to maintain this system over the next years?
Yes, very short question. It's totally united, and even right now, the transatlanticists within Fidesz are not so loud in expressing their disagreement. They say practically nothing in a period where Orban practically rhetorically teams up with Vladimir Putin, and he attacked Ukraine instead of Russia in the last days of the campaign. And after this huge victory, all the inner critical voices will be silenced, and everyone has just to follow the lines. So it's more centralized, more how to say, leader-based and autocratic in many sense than ever before.
Milan, Peter just mentioned the congratulations sent to Budapest. For us as a political think tank of the conservative, liberal, Christian political spectrum, it's very important to see the impacts outside Europe on the right-wing spectrum, from Italy to France to Eastern Central European countries. What is your estimation in regard of the impact of this landslide victory on those forces?
I'll come back to the question, but let me just note that congratulations from Visegrad partners were missing. On that next day, even from Poland. Instead of congratulation, Prime Minister Morawiecki criticized Viktor Orban on his position on Russia. There was a phone call with Vladimir Putin that Viktor Orban tried to sell as his attempt for a ceasefire. So this is Viktor Orban that went to elections for the first time outside of the EPP, after the party was expelled, and also in a corner in Visegrad and in the region. So maybe Pirhik victory is too strong. Yes, economy is very important. There is a budget hole and so on, but there is also tension with the European Commission. This end of the model of cheap energy from Russia, because the whole Europe is deleveraging from energy dependence on Russia, and there is EU framework, which is as long as Hungary is EU member, crucial. So something will have to be given. He will need to give up something, and I think there is a very tough balancing act ahead. And now, when you ask me about his political partners, as he said on the press conference, he will wait for French presidential elections. This is his hope now. Marine Le Pen she's already coming back. She can have a very strong show and result. And then also in parliamentary elections later in June. And still, there is this project of far-right nativist parties camp in the future European Parliament. It didn't work now. There are elections in 2024. I think Viktor Orban is already trying to buy time and look at 2024, where Trump might be re-elected, or there will be a Republican president in the White House and in the European Parliament. He will try to organize. He's no longer looking at the region, except Poland, but he's looking at the partners in Italy, France, Spain, in the big countries. And with them, he will try to come back on the European level with a stronger, to present the force. He always he sees himself as a leader. He has a strong democratic, semi-democratic mandate, but he sees the democratic, popular. I was looking for word popular mandate from home. And also there will be, let's not forget that there will be Hungarian presidency of the European Council in the second part of 2024, so right after European Parliament elections. So 2 years of uncertainty, 2 years where he needs to find a more sort of where we need to bargain with the European Commission, because he will need EU money. To me, the next stage is a tough bargaining over the recovery fund. He needs the recovery fund to be released. Especially, he already feels cheated after the compromise from 2020. Now, Poland might get the recovery fund if they played it clever. They are not playing it clever. But then there will be a question about Hungary, and it's something that will be, it's a right of the country to have the recovery fund if they convince Commission not on rule of law per se, not on democratic values, but on transparency, on anti-corruption. And this is where it's about details. So I will watch who will be nominated in the new government as a Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Justice. These are two key people for negotiation with Brussels and Commission. And let's see how much space of maneuver he has in European capitals, because, and this is my last point, I see him losing Germany, German public, German political elite. When I came to Berlin 4 years ago, he was a Liebling of the German conservative right, of the CSU in particular. Now he is toxic. And And therefore, a discussion, and this is just to finish the argument, the Recovery Fund compromise between the Commission and Budapest will need to be approved in the Council. And then the, let's say, Chancellor Scholz will need to come to Bundestag to argue, to stand behind that compromise. And this is where it will get tough.
Mm. But Peter, these issues of backfiring certain narratives has happened with the Russian issue. Might it be also a challenge for the European side if the Commission, for example, is too much pushy in using, as he might see it, as an instrument against Hungary, and having, as Milan mentioned, this broad democratic support now through his electorate? Does the Commission have to be very careful in dealing with this instrument?
Honestly, I think the Commission has to be very careful to defend the treaty and to do everything to defend the principles. And honestly, I'm just observing this debate for 12 years, and whatever the Commission does or not does, Orban keeps attacking Brussels. So if it criticizes Hungary, then Orban says that it's unfair criticism. If it's not criticizing Hungary, he still says it's unfair criticism. So in a totally post-truth world where Brussels is built up as an arch enemy, I mean, I don't think that anyone in the European political landscape has to be afraid of that. Okay, that it will backfire. I mean, the government chose this path of building up Brussels as an arch enemy. I mean, it was not a response of the government for that, but they planned it a long time ago. Let's think back about when Jean-Claude Juncker appeared in billboards in Hungary as sidelining George Soros as the enemies of the Hungarian people. So I think I think Milan is totally right that Orban should make some correction. I think he should vote Canossa in Berlin, in Warsaw, in Brussels, maybe in Kiev as well. But the first days of his governance so far have not really sent a message that he would like to do that. So Brussels bashing remained, pro-Russian messages remained. The Ukrainian ambassador was summoned to the foreign ministry to get criticism due to the sharp comments. They were really some sharp comments from the Ukrainian diplomats on Hungary, but I think it's understandable in the current environment. So we don't really see this corrective course so far, and not even towards the regional players. And just right now for me it will be even hard to imagine that Orban with this political line will be easily allowed in the ECR. I don't think that the Poles will team up with the pro-Russian far-right parties from Western Europe. But, you know, to enter into ECR, you have to decide members such as the Polish conservatives, such as the Czech governmental party that is also highly critical towards Hungary. So I think that Orban just hopes that his huge domestic political momentum will solve everything. And I think right now he realizes that he's not. But I think after a while he will try to correct some things. But what Milan mentioned, for example, the tiny little details of transparency, I think these are all systemic issues. For example, if you introduce if you would allow the European prosecutor to investigate corruption cases in Hungary, then some governmental members could find themselves in jail. Orban simply cannot allow that. So there might be some window dressing, but I do not expect systemic changes because it would mean giving up the nature of the system that Orban obviously does not want to do. So I would expect rather, let's say, a spiral of conflicts than let's say too much solution and then warming relation with Berlin or with the regional partners.
I remember some discussions before the elections whether Hungary might leave the European Union as a kind of exit. I have an interesting question indeed, that is this an option seriously considered, or does he try to undermine the European system from within? Pavlina, maybe you might follow on this remark.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to happen for Orban to prefer to leave, for Hungary to leave the European Union. He's been stating it repeatedly that the membership of Hungary in the European Union and in NATO are the cornerstones of the Hungarian foreign policy. Yeah, he also needs the money, obviously. At the same time, yeah, I think he is trying to change the EU from within. He's stated on multiple occasions that his take on Europeanness and the European values is the correct one. That Hungary and the Central Europe and Visegrad is where the world is still okay, as opposed to the decaying Western Europe. So yes, I think that he, together with some of his international partners, might be attempting or is attempting at changing the narrative in the European Union. At the same time, I think that in this current situation, again, with his rhetoric towards Ukraine and towards the conflict going on, it's increasingly difficult for him to find allies in the European Union. And personally, I agree with what Peter said about the window dressing, about some corrections in the some corrections are to be expected in the Hungarian foreign policy. But to me, it's just incomprehensible. Why is, even after elections, why is the Hungarian Prime Minister still continuing his unnecessary and divisive rhetoric towards Ukraine? I mean, it would be very easy for him now to just stay silent. It would be the easiest thing. And why isn't he doing that? That's beyond me.
Before we continue with this, I would like to ask our audience to take the opportunity indeed to raise questions we were going to discuss. We have another roughly 15 minutes for our exchange. So please feel free to share your opinions or comments on whatever topic it's related to Hungary. But Milan, back to the European level, which is, of course, as the think tank of the European People's Party, a major concern. How will Hungary act till 2024, even after? How the new fractions, new groupings will happen in the European Parliament? This has massive effects also on the whole range of the conservative liberal spectrum, I think. What are your expectations? I think we will not expect any de-radicalization on part of Fidesz, rather pushing this movement also on a global level. You mentioned Trump, for example, the Republicans. This is something we have to see in, I think, a wider range of topics.
So, if we didn't mention it, on the one hand, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the Commission, started the new untested rule of law procedure, the conditionality. The letter is on the way to Budapest specifying the legal case. In the commentary that we are putting together at DGAP, I'm arguing that in a paradox way, this move, long time demanded by the European Parliament, will free hands for the Commission to start the real bargaining on the recovery fund. If on the one hand, the rule of law conditionality might end up in freezing, some funds, the recovery fund is the big thing. That's the bazooka for the economy, 7 billion euros. The first tranche can be 13%. So huge money for public, for government reforms, and also for public investment, which will be needed in the economy. So I think Peter is right that already in Fidesz they are now strategizing about some kind of a window dressing or some kind of concessions, which will not be made public. They will try to hide it from their own audience because they need this narrative of fighting Brussels. But this is about nitty-gritty issues about And some of the EPP members, like the head of the Budgetary Control Committee, Monica Hoffman and others, are deeply involved into these negotiations, like allowing the EU institutions see who is the final beneficiary of these funds, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. Transparency. Peter, even if you allow European prosecutor to do their work inside Hungary, then you need local police and judges to follow through. So maybe it will be used to protect some remaining judiciary and independence that is there, and so on. I believe there is a space for tough bargaining. I don't know how long it will last. And look, if you around Hungary, there is in Central Europe, if you look, there are elections in Poland next year. I am arguing that it's a different story because you have different media environment in Poland. One reminder to me looking at Hungarian elections is how you said post-truth country it is media control. I mean, government, it's a different country than any other inside the EU, and really different from this perspective, than qualitatively different than Poland. So you have elections in Poland, then you have super elections in Slovakia in 2024. Again, side comment, Viktor Orban with this combination of Ukraine and pro-Russia and the campaign, he lost Slovak conservatives, even those who were sympathetic to him, who would forget, some differences on national issues. And also the mentality, political mentality in among Slovak conservatives and Hungarian is similar. Many things that Orban tried, the narrative that we stay out of the war, it's not our war, we are a small country. I see in Robert Fico, left-wing populists, but they basically are doing the same. They go for anything that has emotions and that sticks with their voting constituency, and that is a permanent campaign. So to end on one point, what I am a bit worried and what I am observing is gradual radicalization of political discourse and spectrum in throughout Central Eastern Europe, except maybe Czech Republic. You had your own Babiš time. You have now more normalcy, but Viktor Orban can still driving it. They will be. We are heading into a very uncertain times on social economic impact of the war or refugees. So I would not. I would not underestimate his potential to come back on the regional level.
Peter, Milan mentioned this issue of the bazooka, this negotiations on the European level, but are there other ways to support, of course, the civil society, the opposition parties, the media sector, which is absolutely dominated by Orban? What would you recommend? We have, political foundations. We have a lot of context into the civil society still. Is there a potential, despite all these problems we have, been aware of?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think this is a very important problem. My main message would be is that don't lose hope in Hungary. Okay, maybe the government has right now 53% of the vote, 7% went to this far-right party. But I think huge part of this result is due to the shock because of the war. And it's already a few months before, I think the result could have been rather different. And also, there is a large chunk of the Hungarian population that is really committed to the democratic values, and also who thinks that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim, and also who would like to live, and majority of the Hungarian society would like to live in the European Union and NATO. I agree with Pavlina that it's not even a question if Hungary will leave. The big question is dirty remain. Will Orban can do a destruction within the European Union? But I think what I think is mostly missing are outreach programs in Hungary by the civil society, by the media, and so on. Something of this have already began, but we could see in the election results that the opposition has closed itself into a Budapest ghetto, and it's like there is nothing, almost nothing beyond that. And I think any kind of outreach programs, let's say talk about NATO in the villages and issues like that would be crucial, and of EU affairs as well, and issues like disinformation. So I think that more outreach, and supporting projects that go outside the bubble, I think it would be very, very important. And we have to tell as well that Orban is, of course, having so he's very voluntaristic, and he could so far survive two crises like the pandemic with very high mortality rate in Hungary, and also the war without popularity loss, but it will not continue this way. So Orban will lose popularity anyhow, and then I think there will be a chance for civil society and also for governmental critical media and also for opposition parties to grasp the attention of the voters. And it already happened in 2019 in the municipal elections. It happened in 2021 at the primaries. So this is absolutely not hopeless. I mean, the result was shocking for many, including for Fidesz. No one expected this landslide, but it will not remain this way forever. And yeah, I think EU support for the civil society and building alternative diplomacy for players of other voices in Hungary, not just the populist right and the far right, remains crucially important.
Sabrina and Milan, these threats had not been unknown to your countries as well. Luckily, they didn't play out to that extent, but are there lessons from your home countries as well to be drawn and maybe one or the other way applied to Hungary and our support for the country and the society? Be it civil society, be it media, closer trans-border cooperation.
I think it's important not to abandon the case of European Hungary, democracy and so on, to really keep in touch, to find partners there. It's as Peter says, it's all process. It's a very damaged sort of playing field, but it's a process. It's the interest of Hungary. I mean, there is no other Hungary than European Hungary, and at some point, even Fidesz will need help with debunking the pro-Russian narratives. They created a certain dependence and demon that will not ask them if they like it or not. So I see similar patterns in Serbia, by the way, when the Moscow is taking the tail of the dog to the extent that President Vučić is in the corner sometimes, or outmaneuvered. So it's also a question to what extent Orban will want to decrease dependence on Russia in energy, and correct his course. He started to do it at the press conference when he said in 2009, when I decided Russia was still part of the sort of European security dialogue. So I made a mistake which doesn't make sense anymore. But at that time, it made sense. So, but coming back to your question, I think it's a lot about online, a lot about sort of communicating with the young generation. So I think Momentum, the party, is confirming the trend elsewhere in the region, in Central Eastern Europe, of young generation political party, which is centrist, liberal, representing different lifestyle. It's important that they don't repeat mistakes of what their peers, for instance, in my home country, Slovakia, Progresívne Slovensko, stand. It's a perfect case of how not to do it. Now, when Hungarian opposition parties will stand on their own and will probably go into next elections alone, so that they go beyond the bubble, beyond they learn to reach out to other strata.
Sabrina, maybe a short final comment on your part, because where we had successfully managed the last elections, but the threats are still there. I think that's not something given either in your country.
Yes, that's what I wanted to point out, that Andrej Babiš isn't the Czech Prime Minister at the moment, but he might very well be the next Czech president in the beginning of the next year. Yeah, your question surprised me a little, but I have a few points perhaps to add. First, I would also very much emphasize that we shouldn't give up on Hungary and Hungarians. I think that would be a great mistake. As for the lessons from the Czech Republic, we also have united opposition in the last parliament elections. To a certain extent, we had two oppositions blocks, so to speak. I think what might be what in the context of the Hungarian elections seems to be important is for these opposition blocks to be internally cohesive when it comes to ideology. Because if we look at the results in Hungary, we see that Jobbik, the part of the opposition coalition, lost very many votes to Fidesz and the far right, Our Homeland. In the Czech Republic, those opposition blocs, they were more or less ideologically on the same boat. Also, what I think is important when you want to really be successful in politics in any country, and I don't think this is particularly a lesson from the Czech Republic, but I think what you need to do is to reach out to people who are on the margins, who don't feel who don't feel like the winners in this world, who feel that they have been neglected. It's usually people who are not living exactly in the capital. It can be people who are living in small villages. What those populist successful parties often do is that they physically get up from their seats in Prague and they really go there to see them and to talk to them. And I think that's something that is very important to build the context and to really show the people that you can that you are inclusive and that you can also take care of their problems.
Well, that's a topic we could indeed discuss for a long time, because it goes into, well, structural challenges of the European party system, not only in Hungary or in your home countries, but even in Western European countries. This would be way too much for today. I would like to thank you all for that very insightful issues. We as the Martin Center keep track on the developments in Hungary. We have close relations to partners there. I think it's even more important to strengthen them, to bring in resources from the European level to analyze, but also to support in very concrete measures. I would like to also thank the audience for the interest in you, and please follow us on our webpage. It's martincenter.eu. We have a lot of events, of publications, and even political consultancy. I wish you a pleasant afternoon, pleasant evening. Hope to see you soon back on our channel.